My name is Delphine Crane, and I'm 31 years old. 4 years ago, my own mother stood up at my husband's memorial service in front of nearly 100 people from our church and told them I was the reason he was dead. She didn't shout it. She didn't cry. She just said it the way you'd report the weather, and after that, I stopped being her daughter. I became the woman who got Trevor killed. They cut me out completely. No calls, no birthday cards, nothing. Then, 11 days ago, my mother sent me a text I never expected to read. Your stepfather is at Mercy West. They're saying days, maybe hours. If you don't come, you'll regret it the rest of your life. I drove 5 hours through a snowstorm to get there, and when I walked into that room, the man I'd hated for 4 years looked up at me, pressed something cold into my hand, and said 6 words that knocked the floor out from under me. It was never your fault, Delphine. Before I tell you what he gave me and how it tore apart the lie I'd been buried under for 4 years, do something for me. If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do by the people who were supposed to love you most, hit that subscribe button and leave the word carried in the comments. And tell me honestly, if your family turned on you and then called you back years later, would you go? Type yes or never. Now let me take you back to the worst night of my life. The text came at 9:14 on a Tuesday night. I was folding laundry on the living room floor in our little rental in Burlington, Vermont, half watching some cooking show I wasn't really paying attention to. My daughter Ren was asleep down the hall. She's 3 now. My phone buzzed against the coffee table, and when I picked it up, I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the area code. 419, Sandusky, Ohio. The place I grew up. The place I swore I'd never go back to. Russell collapsed. He's in Mercy West, ICU, pulmonary failure. They give him days at most. If you don't come, you'll regret it the rest of your life. Your mother. I read it 4 times. I hadn't heard from her in 1,062 days. I know that because I'd counted. The way you count things when somebody erases you and you're trying to convince yourself the erasing was real. The phrase that got me wasn't ICU or days at most. It was you'll regret it. Because that was the same thing she'd said to me 4 years ago, standing in my kitchen with her coat still on, the morning after Trevor died. You'll regret this for the rest of your life, Delphine. You should. She'd looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. I sat there on the floor with a half-folded onesie in my lap, and I thought about deleting it. I should have deleted it, but instead I was already pulling up the weather, already seeing the storm warnings stacked across the Northeast, already doing the math on how long it would take to get from Vermont to Ohio in February. My husband Sam came out of the bedroom in his sweatpants, rubbing his eyes. He took one look at me and knew. He always knew. Who is it? He asked, even though he could already see it on my face. My mother. Russell's dying. He sat down next to me on the floor. He didn't say anything for a long minute. Then, you don't owe them a thing. You know that. I know. So why are you packing in your head right now? He could read me like a grocery list. I started crying, the ugly kind, the kind that comes up out of your chest before you've decided to let it, because if I don't go, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what Russell wanted to say. And I'm so tired, Sam. I'm so tired of wondering things. He pulled me into him and held my head against his shoulder. Then I'll get Ren's stuff together. You leave at first light. The roads'll be better than they are now. I want to tell you about Sam for a second because you need to understand who held me together. Sam was the only person who never once looked at me differently after Trevor. He didn't know me before. We met 2 years after I left Ohio at a community garden of all places, both of us failing to grow tomatoes. He heard the whole story on our 3rd date, every awful piece of it, and he just nodded and said, "That's a heavy thing to carry alone. You don't have to anymore." I married him 8 months later at the courthouse. No family, just 2 friends from his work and a justice of the peace with a cold. I left Burlington at 5:40 the next morning. The snow had led up to flurries. I kissed Ren on the forehead in her crib and whispered that Mama would be back soon, and she made that little sigh she makes and rolled over. She's never met my family. She doesn't know she has a grandmother and a step-grandfather 6 states away who decided, before she was even born, that she didn't count. The drive was long and gray and full of salt trucks. Somewhere around Syracuse, the sun came up weak and white behind the clouds. I stopped for gas outside Erie and bought a coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard and stood in the freezing cold watching my own breath, telling myself I could still turn around. I texted Sam. Almost halfway. I'm okay. He wrote back, "You're braver than you think. Call me when you're there." I didn't feel brave. I felt like a kid being summoned to the principal's office, except the principal had spent 4 years telling everyone I was a killer. I crossed into Ohio a little after noon, and the closer I got to Sandusky, the tighter my chest got. The exits I knew. The water tower I knew. The Methodist church, with the crooked sign I knew. None of it had changed, and somehow that was the cruelest part. A whole life had ended here, and the town didn't even have the decency to look different. But before I tell you what happened at the hospital, you have to understand the night Trevor died, because everything in that safe deposit box, everything Russell handed me, only makes sense if you know what they took from me. It was the 8th of March, 4 years ago, a Friday. We'd all gone up to my mother and Russell's place on the lake for my younger sister's engagement party. My sister, her name was Trevor, by the way. I should have said that. Trevor Crane, 26, the baby of the family, the golden one, the one who could do no wrong. She'd just gotten engaged to a man named Brody, and Mom wanted to throw a party at the lake house before the season turned. It was supposed to be a happy night. There was a cake. There were those little paper lanterns Mom loved. My older brother was there too. His name is Hale. He was 30 at the time. And Hale had a problem nobody in my family was willing to say out loud, which was that Hale drank like the world was ending and got behind the wheel of a car like it didn't matter. He'd had 2 DUIs already that the family had quietly made disappear because Russell knew people, and because in my family, appearances mattered more than truth ever did. By 10 o'clock that night, Hale was wrecked. Slurring, loud, knocking over a lawn chair and laughing about it. Mom and Russell had already gone up to bed. Trevor wanted to head back into town to meet some of her friends to celebrate, and Hale, of all people, said he'd drive. He had the keys to Russell's truck. Trevor pulled me aside in the kitchen. I remember she was holding a slice of cake on the napkins she never ate. "I don't want to get in the car with Hale," she said. "He's hammered, Delphine. Will you come? Will you make him let you drive?" I said yes. Of course I said yes. Of course I said yes. I was the responsible one. I always was. At 10,051 that night, Trevor texted me from across the room, even though I was 20 feet away, because Hale was right next to me and she didn't want him to hear. "Please don't let him drive. I'm scared." That text is still on my phone. I have never deleted it. It is the last full sentence my sister ever said to me, and she said it with her thumbs. We got in the truck at 11,004. I tried to take the keys from Hale and he shoved my hand away and said he was fine. He was always fine, and there was that moment. I think about it every single day where I could have stood in front of the truck. I could have called Mom down. I could have done 100 things. Instead, I got in the passenger seat because I told myself I'd keep him talking, keep him awake, keep him slow. Trevor climbed into the back seat behind Hale. I buckled my seatbelt. She buckled hers. We stopped at a marathon station on Cleveland Road because Hale wanted a bottle of water to sober up. I pumped the gas. $41.16. I will never forget that number. There was a camera over the pumps. I didn't think about it then. But Russell did. A year later, Russell paid that station's manager $300 in cash for a copy of what that camera saw. Trevor bought a pack of gum. Hale bought a lottery ticket, which I remember thinking was strange, because Hale always said scratch-offs were for suckers. Later I understood it wasn't about the ticket. It was a man whose hands needed something to do because part of him already knew what was coming. We pulled out at 11:19. Hale turned the radio up loud, too loud, some classic rock station, and he was driving too fast on Route 6 along the lake, and Trevor said from the back, "Hale, slow down please." And he said, "I've got it." and then there were headlights coming the wrong way around the bend, and a sound I can't describe, and then nothing. I woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed with a fractured collarbone, a concussion, and 41 stitches in my scalp. My mother and Hale were standing over me. The first thing I asked was where Trevor was, and my mother's face did the thing where it crumbles and then hardens all in the same second, and she said, "Trevor's gone, Delphine." I didn't understand at first. The word gone didn't mean anything. And then Hale said in this calm, careful, rehearsed voice, "You were driving, Delphi. You don't remember because of your head, but you were driving." I said, "No, you were driving. You wouldn't give me the keys." And my mother said, "You were driving. The police said so. The doctor said you'd have gaps. Don't make this worse than it already is." And here's the thing about a concussion and grief, and the two people you trust most in the world standing over your hospital bed telling you the same impossible thing your own mind starts to give. I had no memory of the impact, just headlights and Trevor's voice. And they were so sure. They were so calm and so sure, and I was so broken. And somewhere in those first terrible days, I started to believe them. That's the part nobody warns you about. They didn't just lie to me, they made me lie to myself. Hale's fiancée at the time, a woman named Cleo, gave a statement to the responding officer, a deputy named Marcus Polk. She told him I'd insisted on driving, that Hale had offered to call a cab but I'd waved him off, that I'd seemed totally fine. None of it was true, but she said it with a straight face, and she was a dental hygienist with no record, and who was going to doubt her? The crash report listed me as the operator of the vehicle. There were no charges. The investigation stayed open for a while and then quietly closed, the way things do when nobody with power wants the truth dug up. I was never arrested, but I didn't need handcuffs. My family had already handed down the only verdict that mattered. Trevor's memorial was 11 days after the crash, at Hayes Memorial Methodist, the church I'd been baptized in. The place was packed, 100 people, maybe more, all of them looking at me like I was a stain on the carpet. Trevor was cremated. The casket would have been too much, they said. There was a photo on an easel, her senior portrait, that wide, stupid, beautiful smile. I sat in the second to last pew with Sam. Except it wasn't Sam yet. I hadn't met Sam. I was alone, completely alone. The only person who'd come with me was a coworker named Faye, who barely knew me but couldn't stand the thought of me going by myself. The pastor spoke. People cried. And then, during the part where the family was supposed to share memories, my mother stood up at the front, turned around so she was facing the whole congregation, looked right at me in the back and said, clear as a bell, "My daughter Trevor is dead because my other daughter chose to drive drunk. I want everyone here to know exactly who did this." 100 people turned around to look at me. Not one of them said a word in my defense. Not Russell, who was sitting in the front row with his head down. Not Hale, who I would later learn was the only person in that room who knew the truth and let it happen anyway. Faye grabbed my hand so hard it hurt, and I sat there and felt myself stop being a person and start being a story other people told about a tragedy. If you've ever sat in a room where the people who were supposed to protect you handed you over instead, you already know there's no word big enough for that feeling. Leave the word alone in the comments if you've been there. I see every one of them. I left Ohio 3 weeks later with 2 suitcases in my car. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just became, to them, the empty space they'd already decided I was. I drove east until I ran out of money near Burlington, got a job answering phones at a dental office, and slowly built something out of nothing. I met Sam. We got married. Ren was born on a snowy December morning, weighing 6 pounds even, and when the nurse asked her name, I said Ren, after a bird, after nothing and no one, because I wanted her to belong only to herself. My mother never knew she existed. Russell never knew. Hale never knew. I made sure of it. And then, 4 years later, Russell was dying, and my mother said I'd regret it, and against every ounce of sense I had, I drove 5 hours through a snowstorm to find out why a man I'd spent 4 years hating wanted to see me before he died. I walked into Mercy West at 1:38 in the afternoon. I got a visitor's badge from a kiosk in the lobby, badge number 204, which I only remember because of what came later. The fifth floor ICU smelled exactly like the hospital I'd woken up in 4 years before. Bleach and recycled air and something underneath it I'd never been able to name. My mother was in the family waiting room, sitting in a chair by the window with her hands folded in her lap like she was at a luncheon. She looked up at me and didn't stand. "You came," she said. "Not thank you. Not I'm glad. Just you came," like she was checking a box. "You said hours," I said. "I drove all night." She'd aged a decade in 4 years. Her hair had gone fully white. There were deep grooves around her mouth I didn't remember. She looked at me like I was a debt come to collect. "Russell's been asking for you," she said. "I don't know why. He's not lucid." "Whatever he says, don't take it to heart. The medication makes him confused." That last sentence, "don't take it to heart," was the first time in my life I understood that my mother was afraid of something. "Where's Hale?" I asked. "Picking up his kids. He'll be here later." She paused. "Room 5111. Don't tire Russell out." I walked down the hall. A nurse stopped me outside the room. Her badge said Okafor. "Are you Delphine?" she asked. I said I was. "He's been saying your name since this morning. He's in and out. If you want time with him, now's the time." She lowered her voice. "His wife hasn't let anyone alone with him, but he keeps asking for it. For privacy, I think there's something he needs to say." I pushed the door open. The room was dim, the blinds half drawn, the monitors keeping their soft electronic time. And there was Russell, who I remembered as a big, square, intimidating man. A man who'd married my mother when I was 12 and never once made me feel like anything but an inconvenience. And now he was small and gray and folded into the bed like a dropped coat. The oxygen mask fogged with each shallow breath. His eyes were open. He saw me. And his whole face changed. Not relief exactly, something heavier than relief. His hand came up off the blanket and reached toward me. I crossed the room. I didn't know what to feel. "Russell," I said. "It's Delphine." He pulled the oxygen mask down with a shaking hand, even though I could see how much it cost him. "I know who you are," he rasped. "I've known for 4 years exactly who you are." The door opened behind me. "My mother. Russell, leave it. She doesn't need to." "Out," he said. Just that, and there was enough of the old Russell left in that one word that my mother actually stopped. Nurse Okafor appeared behind her. "Ma'am, he's requested privacy. Let's give him a few minutes." And she steered my mother out, and the door clicked shut, and it was just me and the dying man and the hiss of the oxygen. He fumbled under his pillow. His hand was trembling so badly I almost reached to help him, and then I saw what he was pulling out. A key. Small brass, old, with a number stamped into it, 214. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it with both of his hands, and his grip was so much stronger than a dying man's grip should be. "What is this?" I whispered. He worked to get the words out. "Huntington Bank. The branch on Milan Road, box 214. He coughed and the monitor blipped faster. "Your mother doesn't know about it. Hale doesn't know. Nobody knows but you now. Russell, I don't. Listen to me." His eyes locked onto mine, suddenly clear, suddenly there. "It was never your fault, Delphine. You weren't driving that truck. I've known since the night it happened. And I am so sorry. I was a coward. And I let them ruin you. And I built that box because it was the only brave thing I had left in me." The monitor screamed. The door flew open and Nurse Okafor was there, and then 2 more people in scrubs, and someone said his pressure was dropping and I was being moved back toward the wall, the key biting into my closed fist. The last thing I saw before they pushed me out into the hall was Russell's eyes, still on me, holding on. Hale was coming down the corridor as I came out, 41 now, heavier, his face gone soft and ruddy in a way I recognized from our father. He saw the look on my face, and then he saw my fist, clenched white around something. "What he'd give you?" he asked, too fast, too sharp. "Nothing," I said. "Delphine." He took a step toward me. "What did he put in your hand?" I looked at my brother. The brother who'd let our mother stand up in front of 100 people and call me a murderer. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years, which was that I was no longer afraid of him. "How's Cleo?" I asked. He blinked. "We divorced 3 years ago. Why are you—" "I have to go," I said, and I walked past him toward the elevator, and he called my name twice down the hall, and I didn't turn around. The Huntington branch on the Lawn Road was 14 minutes from the hospital. I sat in the parking lot for 5 of them, just staring at the key in my hand, the number 214 catching the gray afternoon light. 4 years. 1,562 days. And a dying man had just told me in the space of one breath that none of it had been true. A banker named Priscilla met me at the desk. I told her I needed to get into a safe deposit box. She asked for the key and my ID, and I handed them over, and she typed something and frowned and typed again, and then she looked up at me with a strange expression. "Ms. Meese Crane, you're a co-lessee on this box. You were added as an authorized holder in September of 2 years ago." "I'm sorry. Russell Vance added your name to this box on September 12, 2 years ago. You've had full access this whole time. 2 years. He put my name on it 2 years ago and never told me. Never called, never said a word, just sat on it, waiting in case I ever came." Priscilla took me back to the vault, turned both keys, and slid the long metal drawer out and set it on the table in the little private room. "Take all the time you need," she said, and she pulled the door shut behind her. Inside the box was a single thick envelope manila, soft at the corners from handling, and on top of it a letter folded in thirds with my name on the outside in Russell's blocky engineer's handwriting. "Delphine, read this one first." My hands were not steady. The letter was 3 pages, dated the same September day he'd added me to the box. "Delphine," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm probably already gone, and that's the only reason I have the nerve to tell you what I should have told you 4 years ago. The night Trevor died, Hale came and found me before the sun was even up. We were in the chapel at the hospital. He was drunk still and shaking, and he told me he'd been driving. He told me Trevor begged him to slow down, and he didn't. He told me you were unconscious in the passenger seat, and he panicked, and before the ambulance got there, he climbed over the console and switched. He put you behind the wheel, because he knew a 3rd DUI with the death attached to it would put him in prison for the rest of his life. He begged me not to tell your mother, and God help me I didn't. I told myself you were strong, that you'd land on your feet, that Hale was the one who couldn't survive what was coming. I told myself 100 things that were really just one thing. I was a coward. When your mother found out, and she found out Delphine within the week, I told her myself because I couldn't carry it alone. She made her choice fast. She said we'd already lost 1 child and she wouldn't lose another to a prison cell. She said you were tough. You didn't need us. She decided you'd be the one to carry it, and I let her decide. That's the part I can't ever take back. I didn't just stay quiet. I let her stand up at that church. I sat in the front row and looked at my shoes while she did it. By the time I understood what we'd done to you, you were gone and you wouldn't take a call, and I deserved that, so I did the only thing left. I started building this. I hired a man. I paid for the gas station tape. I wrote it all down while I still remembered it clearly. I couldn't undo it while I was alive without burning your mother and your brother to the ground, and I was too much of a coward for that too. But I could leave you the truth, notarized and dated, so that when I'm gone you can do whatever you want with it. You deserve your name back. You deserve to put Trevor's death down. I am more sorry than this letter could ever say. Russell. There was a notary stamp at the bottom, dated signed by a woman named Bridget Awuki. I read it twice. Then I opened the manila envelope and the contents slid out across the table, and I went through them one at a time. The crash report. Operator listed as Delphine Crane, but clipped behind it were the scene photographs. 14 of them, and even with no training I could see what Russell must have seen. The way the driver's side door had crushed inward, the way the steering column had bent, all of it on the wrong side for the story they'd told. And one photo of Hale standing at the edge of the road with a foil blanket around his shoulders, and a look on his face I'd never seen on a man in my life. Not grief. Calculation. A USB drive in a small paper sleeve labeled in Russell's hand, Marathon Station, Cleveland RD, March 8/11:04 p.m. Paid $300 cash. I couldn't watch it there. I didn't have to. I knew what it would show. Hale getting into the driver's side, me getting in the passenger door. A transcript of the 911 call, 3 pages, made by a passing motorist at 11:26 that night, a man named Earl Dombrowski. Line 8. The guy driving was flying, had to be doing 70 on that curve. The guy. The dispatcher asked if he could see the driver. There's people pulling somebody out. I can't tell now, but it was a man behind the wheel. I saw him come around the bend. A man. Before anyone told him a story. A man. A typed memo, dated the morning after the crash. Russell's own record of what Hale told him in that chapel, every word, while it was still fresh. A private investigator's report, 19 pages, from a firm in Toledo. Subject, Hale Crane. Findings, outstanding gambling debts of $112,000, the majority owed to online sportsbooks, the rest on 6 maxed credit cards. And one line that made me put the page down and breathe for a second, a note that Russell had been planning to transfer ownership of his contracting company, valued at just over $3 million, to Hale, and that the transfer was contingent on Hale staying out of legal trouble. A felony would have killed it. Hale didn't lie just to stay out of prison. He lied to keep $3 million. And the last thing in the envelope, a sworn affidavit, 2 pages, in which Russell stated under penalty of perjury that his stepson Hale Crane had confessed to operating the vehicle that killed Trevor Crane. It was dated, it was notarized, it was complete in every way but one. He'd never filed it. Clipped to the front was a yellow sticky note in his handwriting. I couldn't pull the trigger while I was alive. Your mother would never have forgiven me and Hale would have gone away for good. I'm sorry. But it's here for you now. Use it. I sat in that little room for the better part of an hour. The man I had hated for 4 years, the man who'd looked at his shoes while my mother destroyed me, had spent his last clear-headed years building me a case strong enough to clear my name and burn his own family down. And then he'd handed me the match and the choice, both. He hadn't been able to be brave for me when it counted, but he'd made sure I could be brave for myself. I didn't cry. I expected to, and I didn't. What I felt was colder and cleaner than tears. They hadn't just let me carry it. They had needed me to. I was the load-bearing wall holding up their whole comfortable lie. I made copies of everything on the branch's machine. Priscilla helped me without a single question, just handed me a stack of paper and a fresh folder, and I drove back to the hospital with the original envelope on the passenger seat where my sister used to sit. It was 4:50 when I walked back into the family waiting room. My mother was there. Hale had arrived, and so had a woman I didn't know and an older woman in the corner. I slowly recognized as my Aunt Tess, my father's sister, the only relative who'd ever sent me a Christmas card after the funeral. I sat down across from my mother and Hale and set the folder on the low table between us. "What's that?" Hale said, and his voice already wasn't right. "Russell left me a safe deposit box," I said. "He's been keeping things in it." About the night Trevor died. My mother's hands tightened in her lap. "Russell is heavily sedated. He doesn't know what he's saying. Whatever's in there, the scene photos show the driver's side, took the impact." I laid them out on the table, one after another, like dealing cards. If I'd been driving and hit that guardrail the way the report says, the damage would be on my side. It's not, it's on Hale's. Hale stood up. "You don't know what you're talking about. There's footage from the marathon on Cleveland Road." I set the USB sleeve down, time-stamped 11:04. "It shows who got behind the wheel that night. It wasn't me, Hale." The color went out of my brother's face the way water goes out of a sink. "There's a 911 call from a man who watched the truck come around the bend." I read it aloud, my voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. It was a man behind the wheel. "I saw him." I looked up. A man. Before anybody told him anything. My Aunt Tess had her hand over her mouth. The woman I didn't know was staring at Hale. My mother reached for the folder. I slid it out of her reach. "Russell wrote down what you told him in the hospital chapel, Hale, 6 hours after she died." I was driving, I panicked. I moved her over. I let that sit in the air. And he hired a man who found out you owed $112,000 and that you were about to inherit a $3 million company that a felony would have cost you. I set the PI report on the table on top of everything else. So you put your dead sister's death on your living one, and our mother helped you do it. Hale's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times over 4 years, and in every version he had some clever answer, some way to twist it. He had nothing. He just stood there with his mouth open like a man who'd forgotten how words worked. The woman beside him, I realized later she was someone he'd been seeing, stood up and stepped away from him, slowly, like she was backing away from an animal. "Hale," she said, "tell me she's lying. He didn't." I turned to my mother. The hardest part wasn't Hale, it was her. Russell wrote in his letter that you told him we'd already lost one child and you wouldn't lose another to a prison cell. That I was tough. That I didn't need you. My voice didn't shake. I was almost surprised by that. You looked at your 2 living children and you decided which one was worth saving. And you stood up in that church and you told 100 people I killed my sister, and you knew the whole time. My mother's face was stone, but her eyes weren't. "You have no idea what it would have done to this family," she said. My Aunt Tess made a small sound, almost a sob. "Oh my God, Diane. Oh my God." I stood up and gathered the folder. "I don't want your money," I said. "I don't want the house or the company or any of it. I want my name. I want Trevor's death to belong to the person who caused it, and I want you to know that as of today, I'm done carrying it for you." I held up the folder so they could see it. "I've made copies. One's already going to the sheriff's office, one to the insurance company that paid out on a lie, one to a lawyer, and one stays with me." Hale finally found his voice. "Delphine, wait, we can." "No," I said. I walked down the hall to room 511 and I let myself in. Russell was unconscious now, the mask back over his face, the monitors keeping their slow patient count. I stood over him for a moment. I don't know what I felt. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something. I leaned down and put my hand over his, the way he'd put his over mine. "Thank you," I said very quietly. "It was the bravest thing you ever did, and you did it too late, and I'll never know how to feel about that. But thank you." Then I left. I didn't stay for the end. Russell died at 2:11 the next morning. My mother called me. I let it go to voicemail and listened to it standing in a motel parking lot off the interstate. Her voice small and lost in a way I never heard, saying he was gone and the family was broken and couldn't we please talk? I saved the voicemail. I didn't call back. I filed everything the following week. Certified mail, signature required, to the Erie County Sheriff's Office, to the insurance carrier, to a family law attorney named Gloria, whose name a friend had given me. I didn't demand that they arrest my brother. I didn't ask for anything at all. I just put the truth on the record, where it could never be unsaid again. What happened after wasn't revenge. It was just gravity, finally doing what it does. The sheriff's office reopened the file. The insurance company opened a fraud inquiry. Hill's company transfer fell apart when Russell's estate attorney saw the affidavit. The woman who'd been backing away from him in the waiting room never came back. My mother stopped speaking to almost everyone, the way you do when the story you built your whole life on collapses and there's nothing underneath. My Aunt Tess started calling me. Every couple of weeks just to talk. She told me, on one of those calls, "You did the right thing, honey. I should have said something at that church 4 years ago, and I'll carry that till I die." I told her she didn't have to carry anything, we'd all carried enough. On the 8th of March this year, Trevor's birthday, she would have been 30. I drove back to Ohio one last time. Not to see my family. I went to the cemetery out on the edge of town where they'd buried her ashes. Her stone was simple, just her name and her dates and the word beloved. It didn't say anything about how she died. I brought tulips, because she always thought roses were trying too hard. Wren had drawn a picture that morning, a wobbly little crayon thing of 2 girls holding hands under a yellow sun, and she'd told me, "That's you and your sister, Mama." I don't know how she knew. I'd never told her she had an aunt. Kids know things. I folded the picture and tucked it against the base of the stone. And then I knelt down in the cold grass, and I talked to my sister for the first time in 4 years. I told her I was sorry it took me so long. I told her I knew now, really knew, in my body and not just in my head, that it wasn't me, that it was never me. I told her about Wren, who has her chin, and about Sam, who would have loved her, and about the life I'd built 500 miles from the place that tried to erase me. I'm not going to carry your death anymore, I told her. I'm going to carry you instead, the real you, not the lie they made out of you. The morning was very quiet. Just wind off the lake and a few crows somewhere. I stayed until my knees went numb. And when I stood up to leave, the thing I'd been waiting 4 years to feel finally arrived. Except it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't triumph. It was grief. Plain, clean grief. For a sister I loved, with no guilt tangled up in it. And I understood that this was the thing they'd stolen from me even more than my name. They'd never let me just be sad. They'd made me be guilty instead. And now, finally, I could just miss her. Sam asked me when I got home whether I thought I'd ever talk to my mother again. We were standing in the kitchen and Wren was coloring at the table and the windows were going dark blue with evening. Maybe, I said, if she ever decides to tell the truth out loud with her own mouth the way she told the lie. Until then, no. My mother left another voicemail a few days later. She wanted to talk. She still hasn't apologized. Not once. Not in any of them. She wants to skip to the part where the family is whole again without doing the part where she admits what she broke. And I've learned that I don't owe anybody my forgiveness on their schedule, or at all. I'm sitting on my porch as I write this. It's evening. Wren is drawing chalk hearts on the driveway and yelling at me to come look at every single one. Sam's inside making too much pasta, the way he does. The sky's gone that soft pink it does in spring. This is the life I built out of the empty space my family carved me into. Russell couldn't be brave for me when I needed it, but in the end, he handed me the truth and let me be brave for myself. And maybe I'm still deciding. Maybe that's the only apology he had it in him to give. I don't know if my mother will ever say the words. I don't know if my brother will ever sit in the courtroom and answer for what he did. But I know I'm not the woman who killed her sister, and I never was. For 4 years I carried a death that wasn't mine. Now I only carry my sister, and the truth, and my daughter's chalk hearts. And that's a weight I can hold for the rest of my life. The door back into my family is still there, but it's mine now. And I'm the one who decides who walks through it. For 4 years I believed the thing they told me, and that's the part that still frightens me most. Not that Hale lied or that my mother chose him over me, but that 2 people I trusted could stand over a hospital bed and rewrite what was true inside my own head. A concussion made me vulnerable, but it was the trust I gave them that made the lies stick. I've thought about that a lot since. The people closest to you have the most power to bend your sense of reality, and the only protection against that is learning to hold on to what you know, quietly, even when everyone around you is certain you're wrong. Trevor's text was still on my phone the whole time. The truth was in my pocket for 4 years. I just stopped trusting my own eyes. I think about how easy it would have been for me to stay erased, to delete my mother's message, to never drive through that snow, to let Russell die with the truth locked in a box no one would ever open. The thing that saved me wasn't luck. It was that some stubborn part of me still needed to know, still refused to let the question die, even after 4 years of being told to be quiet. That refusal to look away from a hard thing is its own kind of strength. And I'd undervalued it my whole life, because my family taught me that keeping the peace mattered more than facing the truth. What I want anyone watching to take from this is simpler than revenge. Hill chose to protect $3 million and his own freedom over his sister's name. My mother chose comfort over what was right, and she's living now in the rubble of that choice, alone, because choices like that always come due. You don't escape what you do to people. It compounds quietly until one dying man's confession brings the whole structure down. That's not fate, that's just consequence finding its way home. But I also learned that being right isn't the same as being whole. I could have spent the rest of my life bitter, and I'd have been justified, and it would have hollowed me out anyway. The harder work was deciding what kind of person I wanted to be on the other side of it, honest with my daughter, steady with my husband, capable of grieving my sister cleanly instead of through a fog of guilt that was never mine. Doing the right thing when it costs you. Thinking clearly when everyone wants you confused, and finding the grit to keep standing when your own family has knocked you flat. Those 3 things saved my life, and not one of them came naturally. I had to learn them in the worst way there is. So if anyone has ever made you doubt what you know to be true, please hear me. Hold your ground, get the proof if you can, and build a life so solid that even the people who erased you can't write the ending. The door is mine now. I decide who walks through it,